It public. Here's investigative reporter Tony Pipitone.
If you need trauma care, you'll be taken in most cases to the closest trauma center. It's a decision that is made for you. But only when the bills come in will you learn how much that decision could cost you. No doubt about it, Fred Halleck needed a trauma center.
3 broken vertebrae in my back, broken femur off the hip, broken foot, and 12 staples in my head.
Injuries from this tree that fell on him as he walked across this Key West patio.
I could hear the tree snap, but before I knew it, I was down.
Down, out, and on his way by helicopter to Kendall Regional, where he spent 12 days. But his recovery took a hit when the bills started showing up. What do you think about these numbers?
They're outrageous. They really are.
CT scans, $57,000. MRIs, $24,000. And something called a trauma response fee, $23,445. That's the admission charge to Kendall's Trauma Center, a fee the hospital says reflects the cost of having a trauma team in the community available 24/7. So we wanted to know what others in the community charge for their trauma response fees. We analyzed 4 years of admissions to Jackson's Ryder Trauma Center and Broward House 2 centers. And when we compared their average trauma response fee to Kendall's, we found Kendall's 10 times higher.
Wow.
We showed Halleck's itemized charges to Martha Baker, a longtime critical care nurse and president of a healthcare workers union.
$8,366.
Man, oh man. They figured out the business model. Trauma makes money.
And when she saw how Kendall compares to the other trauma centers, she had a word for it.
Despicable.
Kendall Regional declined to answer why its charges were so much higher, but sent a statement that said, "Rarely do charges represent the amount actually paid by patients." Kendall says insurance and government programs determine how much money it receives and what patients actually pay.
The bill was outrageous.
Fred Halleck's charges totaled $346,000.
I just started to freak. I started to panic. I didn't know what I was going to do.
So he called attorney Tom Scalero, who negotiated the charges down and paid Kendall with a portion of a confidential settlement reached with the people responsible for the tree falling. Now, he's hoping he's never faced with going to a trauma center again.
I think someone's making a lot of money on very injured people.
Halleck told us the care he received at Kendall Regional was very good and likely saved his life. But the question remains, at what cost? The trauma fee is only a small part of the overall charges. And tomorrow at 6, wait till you see how our area trauma centers stack up when it comes to total charges. Tony Pipitone, NBC6 News.
Oh, very. Well, in the last hour, the NBC6 investigators were fielding questions on Facebook about the high cost of health care.
Now, this follows the investigation last night that revealed how Kendall's trauma response fee is 10 times higher than other South Florida centers on average. Tonight, investigative reporter Tony Pipitone shows what he found when he looked at the total charges for those most seriously hurt. Tony?
Yeah, Jackie, we found overall charges at Kendall Regional Trauma much higher than at other area trauma centers. The hospital says it's not gouging patients, that its charges reflect what it costs to operate a trauma center in this community. But they didn't explain why their charges are so much higher. When you need trauma care in Miami-Dade County, where you're injured largely determines where you'll wind up. If it's in the blue area, it's likely Ryder Trauma Center. If in the red, it's off to Kendall Regional's Trauma Center. Both have round-the-clock critical care doctors and staff and meet state standards for trauma centers. But when it comes to charges, one trauma center, Kendall's, stands apart. Just ask Alejandro Serrano and Fred Halleck. The two uninsured men found the same word
They're outrageous. They
in
really
2
are.
languages to describe charges at Kendall's Trauma Center. Serrano's totaled $94,000 for a few hours of care after a car crash. Halleck's nearly $346,000 over 12 days after a tree fell on him. To see how Kendall's charges compare, we analyzed total trauma charges for 20,000 admissions to South Florida trauma centers over 4 years. Jackson's Ryder Trauma Center and Broward House 2 centers averaged about $89,000. Kendall Regional's, $140,000 higher. Kendall Regional is owned by the for-profit company HCA Holdings. which reported more than $2 billion in profits last year alone. Jackson and Broward's health systems are public, supported in part by tax dollars. But when we asked Kendall why its charges were so much higher, it did not give its for-profit status as a reason. Attorney Tom Scalaro often deals with hospitals in settling personal injury claims.
There's certain hospitals like Jackson Hospital who charge reasonable marketable rates, and there's others that come real close to taking advantage of the situation.
Scalaro helped Halleck negotiate down his Kendall regional bill, paying off an undisclosed amount with some proceeds from a claim against the people Halleck blamed for the tree falling.
There's a difference between making a profit and being greedy, okay? And I think some of what we see in these bills is greed.
Radiology charges expose one of the biggest differences. Serrano and Halleck both had CT scans of their head. The charge at Jackson's Ryder Trauma Center would be $1,500. The charge at Kendall Regional, $8,400, 4.5 times higher. What do you think about the disparity in those numbers?
Oh my gosh.
Halleck said he got good care at Kendall Regional, but wonders at what cost.
If I'm dying of thirst, don't charge me $15,000 for a glass of water.
Now, we asked Kendall why its charges were so much higher for trauma care, and it declined to answer those questions. Instead, the hospital stressed that charges are, quote, rarely what patients pay, that insurance and government programs determine how much the hospital receives. Tony Pipitone, NBC6 News.
Very